aggression out on one person. That one person happened to be my girlfriend, now wife. And she helped me a lot during that time period. And here's the thing, I never sought clinical help during that time period. I actually didn't really seek clinical help till about 2 years ago. So I was 2 years into my professional degree, trying to become a social worker, before I kind of realized that I really do need help. And it was a rough conversation to have with myself that, hey, like, I can't do this by myself. Like, I really need just to talk to someone. And the professional helped. They helped give me like the real diagnosis, like, hey, this is what's going on and it is okay. What really helped was getting back to my passions in life. One thing I haven't mentioned at this point is I'm a competitive shooter. And shooting has always been a stress relief for me. And not only that, but the competition side. I've been in the competition scene since I was 15. I'll toot my own horn here. I have multiple national titles, so I'm fairly decent at it. But when I was running rescue, I couldn't do those stress relief activities because my competitions were always on Saturdays and Sundays, and I worked the weekend shift. So I was always around constant trauma, and I never got a chance to have a healthy stress release from it.
The messaging there is that if you recognize that your life is out of balance, try to find something to put it in balance. I mean, if I could, tie up a little bow on that. Interesting though that you mentioned that you never sought professional help until you were into your schooling for your professional career. And I think that that's probably a story that a lot of us experience, where there's so much stigma and judgment about going and seeking professional mental health help that we ourselves who are in the career don't do it either until we recognize, holy cow, like, this is okay and necessary sometimes. Now, that's not to say that it's required. And some grad programs actually mandate that you go get service, which I have a whole belly full of problems with. And I can elaborate on that later if you really want to hear it. But mandatory treatment is just not a good idea. But when we get into the process of the inevitable self-development that occurs through coursework, it unlocks a lot of demons, right? And you start looking at your own blind spots going, ooh, I didn't know that was there. And then you have a choice, because there's an old saying that says, once you become aware, you can no longer become unaware. Your choice is deal with it or continue lying to yourself that it's a problem. And so it sounds like you dealt with it. And I'm curious what your experience was. How do you go into an appointment, say, I'm picturing myself, like kind of scratching your head, kicking, eyes downcast at the floor, kicking, like, hey, I'm here because I've had this problem for a few years. Like, how did that unfold?
So I was scared to death because so now I guess we'll dive right into it, because, we've always heard the rumors and stuff that if you seek help, they'll take your guns. And even though I knew that wasn't true, God, I was so scared. And so I'm filling out the survey and everything. And it's like, I think it was like 95 to 100 questions, the pre-intake survey they always have you take. And I'm sitting there filling things out, and I'm realizing, like, I'm going to sound like I'm crazy to this person.
Yeah.
And just every question, when it's asking, about aggression or nightmares and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, check. Oh man, this isn't going to be good. And then I get in there and they ask about professional hobbies and stuff you have. And my wife told me that if I'm going to do this, I have to be honest. And so I was like, all right, cool. I'm having all this aggression. I have all these nightmares, and I like to play with guns. This is going to be great.
Right. Yeah.
And the first session, the woman that I talked to, she straight up asked me about some of the nightmares and stuff like that. And I went into detail. And the biggest thing that happened to me is, luckily now these days, I can talk about that call without going into an emotional breakdown. There was a lot of calls that affected me, but there was one in particular that I felt absolutely helpless about. I can go into a little bit detail, or I can no detail. What would you like?
You know what? Whatever you're comfortable with. The listening audience, they know they're tuned into a mental health show, so we don't do trigger warnings. But
all right, fair enough.
You can opine on that if you want to. That's another soapbox, but
for me, the call it was always a constant nightmare, because there's when think about working county EMS and county firefighting, is that it's not like you're in like New York City where if you call 911, you're going to have like, 15 firefighters show up at your door. If you call 911 in a rural environment, you may have one person show up for 30 minutes before you have backup.
It's true.
And I showed up to a drunk driver call that hit a couple other people. So there was 5 victims, 2 of which were dead on arrival, one of which was like basically jelly on the road, which was still alive. And I was the only person there for 30 minutes by myself trying to take care of stuff. And there was people watching. And the thing that affected me the most was there was a little kid watching. And so me trying to run that scene by myself just absolutely positively terrified me. And I didn't realize just how much that affected me until years later when I kept having recurring nightmares of that dream, then like interlaced with other calls that I went through, and having to actually face that, like, hey, it is okay. The fact that that absolutely terrified me was the hardest thing to get over.
What was hard about it?
The hardest thing about that was knowing that I did not have the skills or knowledge at the time to save those individuals. That if someone, if an actual, because I showed up working as the fire department that night because I just happened to be manning the station by myself. And that's actually how that is usually run in rural environments. You have one person at the station by themselves and other volunteers show up. And mind you, I was a volunteer for that station at the time. I wasn't even on there as a paid staff. I had paid staff job elsewhere. I just did this as a volunteer. And so I showed up there, and the way the wreck happened and the road it was at, the best part about this, it was 5 minutes from my house. So I had to see this every day coming past it. So for years I drove past the same spot every day. I knew that brown spot in the road was not from oil, stuff like that. Man.
Yeah.
So regardless of that, I saw all this scene, and knowing that if I had a full ambulance on scene, at least 2 of those people would have lived. If maybe I would have gotten there earlier, I could have lived. Like, all these thoughts flew through my head, and the simple fact that I couldn't help them go through there. And there was also weird stuff about that call, about the sense that to this day, I'm still not sure if it was a trick of the brain or if it was like something supernatural. I have no idea. They're like, the guy that died on the scene, that was already dead on the scene, my brain says he came up to me running saying they're over there. So, just weird tricks of the brain that happened that night,
Wow. Yeah. And something like that will really shake you, I think. And I don't know, I'm not going to share my stories because the show's not about me, but I can identify with imagery, replaying over and over, feeling helpless. And my question, I guess, is because it's really easy to get bitter and cynical and jaded when things don't go the way that we want them to, especially when lives are lost. Did it affect your belief systems in things like I don't know, personal faith, spirituality, but also governance, emergency response, the profession as a whole? Like, did you start questioning stuff?
Yes, and yes.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. No, just kidding.
We'll dive right in. So I grew up in a Christian household, but I am not Christian myself. I think the term is probably agnostic. I believe there's a God out there. I just don't know what the God is. Mm-hmm. The way I put it out there is that if there's an infinite God out there and his infinite wisdom, how can man put that into small words?
Yeah. Say that again real quick. That was really good.
If there's an infinite, all-powerful God that's supposed to exist out there, how can man put him into a finite set of rules and reason?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. It does defy logic, right? Yeah. Yeah,
and so I really questioned that. I'd already started going down like a rabbit trail of like, hey, why do is this the religion for me? And some of that was because I was starting to question other belief systems I held. And the WTTA podcast I talked about, there was a paramedic who took me under his wing and like mentored me. And in it, for years, I had really negative thoughts, and I said a lot of bad stuff about like in the LGBT community. And this paramedic happened to be gay. And the day I found out, I was like, why did you never like yell at me, hit me or something like that? And it was just, he told me, hey, like, I figured one day you would come to me and you would find out, and you would grow. And so I'm talking about, so that really started shaking my beliefs in like Southern Christian churches and their way they treated like the LGBT community. But that call really also started shaking me, is like, I mean, I've definitely questioned it. Like, how could a God allow this to happen? Mm-hmm. And then I was really mad about like, if the county actually would put more money into this stuff, we could have saved these people tonight. If we've been saying for years this was a bad section that they needed to fix, and to this day it's not fixed. Like, I can go to that corner today, and it's still going to be it's still the exact same way. And it's just, and there's nothing wrong with the road per se. It's just, it's a very dangerous section of the road at like 2 a.m. in the morning, mm-hmm. which, I mean, just happened to be 4 vehicles there at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you navigate that without slipping into, you're a pretty positive person. That's what I'm saying. This, like, you're cheerful and you're upbeat, and you're a joy to talk to. How did you prevent yourself from just going into bitterness and anger? For
a while, I didn't.
Fair enough.
I was a very bitter, very mean person to be around. Now, I can put on the act in a sense, that like, hey, I won't automatically be mean to you and stuff like that. But I got canned from a couple jobs during that time period. I mean, they were part-time jobs, and one was actually a real job. I needed this to pay rent. But it was just my attitude. If I viewed you, I guess I can just go into it. I have a thing where I like to expect perfection. And if I view someone as like not being perfect, and I'm not talking about clients, I'm talking about like actual coworkers, someone who's supposed to have this job. If I view you as not being perfect, I'm very judgmental of you, and it's something that I have to personally work on. I've gotten really better about it over the years, trying not to be judgmental towards individuals. But during that time period, I could not hold my tongue. Like, I lashed out at people who I believe did not deserve this job, because we're doing serious work that people's lives are on this matter. And I just, I said things I shouldn't have said and was asking that to come back. And like I said, a lot of it I contribute now, looking back on it, was I was dealing with trauma that I didn't have a proper outlet for. So my body said, all right, you're going to get out. You're going to get this out one way or the other. But unfortunately, you're dealing with it in a bad way.
Yeah, a lot of people refer to that as like a projection too. So if you're taking stuff that you don't want to look at in yourself and ascribing it to other people, we call that a shadow projection. You're unwilling to deal with your own shadow, so you'll find it in other people. And sometimes that's nefarious, sometimes it's not. And it sounds like in this case, what was going on with you is your inability to save the day, essentially, help more, became a condescending judgment of others. Like, if you don't want to be here, like, you need to leave. And it's like, really what you're saying is, I failed and I don't think I should be here. And that's a really tough corner for people to turn their heads around, because they don't want to look that closely at themselves and be like, oh yeah, maybe I do. Yeah. Maybe I do need to deal with this stuff or whatever.
I had a job at the time working for a department that the only reason I got was because I was an Eagle Scout. The guy who interviewed me was an Eagle Scout, and he said, if you're an Eagle, I'll take a chance on you. And I'll be honest, I didn't think I belonged there. I didn't think I was good enough yet. And then I was dealing with that on top of stuff, and it was a really, really bad spiral of events.
So you're out now. What was the process like going through that to regain some sense of tranquility?
So one of the biggest thing I did is I actually just had to step away from the profession as a whole. I got a summer job working as a wilderness therapy counselor, guide person. It was for a company called Sioux of the Carolinas in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And I worked with adolescent kids. The kids I worked with the most were actually what they called the seasons group. They were the 6 to 11-year-old kids. And my first couple weeks there, I hated it working with them, because these were kids that had real issues. I mean, there's like every other age group had their own specific categories. Like you had the girls group, you had the boys group, and then each one had subgroups. You know, some were substance